8-year-old Michael Jackson sat in the back seat of his family's van, his small hands trembling as he stared out the window at the modest building that would either make or break his family's dreams. Steeltown Records didn't look like much from the outside, sandwiched between a hardware store and a laundromat on the edge of downtown Gary, Indiana. But inside those walls was a real recording studio with professional equipment. As the van pulled into the parking lot on that cold March morning in 1968, Michael felt his stomach twist into knots. Everything his family had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, everything they had dreamed about for the past 3 years was riding on what happened in the next few hours. "If we don't get this recording right, we lose the deal," Joe Jackson had said during the drive, not to scare his sons, but to prepare them for the reality of their situation. Gordon Keith, the owner of Steeltown Records, had taken a massive chance on the Jackson 5. He'd paid for studio time, arranged for professional musicians, set up potential distribution deals. But this was it. One shot. If the recording wasn't good enough, if the single didn't have commercial potential, there wouldn't be a second chance. No other record label was going to give 5 kids from Gary, Indiana, another opportunity like this. "What if I mess up?" Michael whispered to his mother, Katherine, his voice barely audible over the sound of his brothers talking excitedly in the seats around him. "What if my voice sounds different in the studio? What if I can't do it like I do it at home?" Katherine squeezed his small hand, feeling how cold and clammy it had become. "You won't mess up, baby. You're going to do what you always do, sing from your heart, and it's going to be beautiful." But Michael wasn't convinced. He'd heard the stories about professional recording studios, how they were different from performing live, how much harder it was. The microphones picked up every tiny mistake, every breath, every moment of uncertainty. What if 8 years old was too young for this level of pressure? What Michael didn't know was that in just 3 hours, a recording engineer with 15 years of experience was going to play back his first take and say something he'd never said before about any artist, let alone a child. "I've never heard anything like this from a first take." Not from anyone, and definitely not from someone his age. March 23, 1968 was supposed to be just another Saturday for most people in Gary, Indiana. But for the Jackson family, it was the day that would determine whether years of rehearsals, performances in dingy clubs, and Joe Jackson's relentless pursuit of his son's musical careers would finally pay off. Steeltown Records was Gordon Keith's passion project, built over the course of 3 years in what used to be a small warehouse. He was a local businessman who loved music and saw potential in Gary's talented but often overlooked musicians. He'd recorded gospel groups, R&B artists, even a polka band once, but he'd never worked with children before. When Joe Jackson had approached him 6 months earlier about recording the Jackson 5, Gordon had been honestly skeptical. "Kids?" Gordon had said, shaking his head. "I don't know, Joe. Kid groups are cute for local talent shows, but they don't sell records. The music business is about more than just being able to carry a tune." But Joe Jackson wasn't easily discouraged. "These kids are different," he insisted, with the conviction of a man who had staked everything on his belief in his son's abilities. "Give us one session, just one. If you don't like what you hear, I'll pay for the studio time myself." Gordon had agreed, mostly because he admired Joe's determination and because the Jackson 5 had been building a decent reputation in the local club scene. Kids or not, they could perform, and they had something that made audiences pay attention. But agreeing to let them record and actually believing they could create something commercially viable were two very different things. Now, on this Saturday morning in March, Gordon was about to find out if his gamble would pay off or if he just wasted a day that could have been spent on more promising projects. The Jackson 5 arrived at exactly 9 a.m. Joe Jackson believed in punctuality above almost everything else. The boys piled out of the van in their matching outfits. Katherine had stayed up late the night before, making sure they looked professional. Jackie was 14, Tito was 13, Jermaine was 12, Marlon was 10, and Michael, the youngest at 8, looked impossibly tiny next to his older brothers. He was wearing a brown suit jacket that Katherine had tailored to fit his small frame, but even with all her careful alterations, he still looked like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. "You boys ready for this?" Gordon asked, shaking Joe's hand and trying to project more confidence than he actually felt. "We're ready," Joe replied with the kind of determination that made Gordon both admire and worry about the man. There was so much riding on this for the Jackson family, so much hope and financial investment, that Gordon almost felt guilty for the doubt he was harboring about their chances of success. The recording engineer, Don Davis, had been setting up equipment since 7 a.m. He'd worked with Gordon on dozens of sessions over the past 2 years and knew how to get good sound out of the modest but well-equipped studio. When he saw the Jackson boys file in, he couldn't hide his skepticism. Don had worked with inexperienced artists before, and it was always challenging. But recording with children? That was a potential nightmare waiting to happen. Kids got nervous. Their voices changed when they were under pressure. They couldn't handle the technical demands of professional recording. "They're so young," Don whispered to Gordon as they watched the boys look around the studio with wide eyes. "You sure about this?" Kids don't usually have the vocal control or the emotional maturity to handle professional recording. Gordon nodded, though he was beginning to share Don's concerns. "Joe says they're good. Let's give them a shot and see what happens." Don approached the group with the kind of patient professionalism he'd developed over years of working with nervous artists. "All right, boys, who's singing lead on this track?" Michael raised his hand hesitantly, and Don looked down at him. 8 years old, barely 4 feet tall, and looking absolutely terrified. "Have you ever recorded in a studio before, son?" "No, sir," Michael said quietly, his voice almost getting lost in the acoustics of the studio space. Don sighed internally. This was going to be even harder than he'd thought. "Okay, here's how this works. Recording is completely different from performing live or even rehearsing at home. The microphone picks up everything. Every breath, every tiny mistake, every moment where your voice wavers or loses focus. So we're going to do a lot of takes, maybe 10, maybe 20. We keep going until we get it right. Don't get discouraged if the first few don't sound good. That's completely normal, even for experienced artists." Michael nodded, but his stomach was churning with anxiety. Joe put his hand on Michael's shoulder, and Michael could feel the weight of his father's expectations in that touch. "You know the song, boy. Just sing it like you've been singing it at home." But Michael could hear what his father wasn't saying. "You better not mess this up. Too much is riding on this for you to fail now." The song was called Big Boy, an up-tempo R&B number that Gordon had written specifically for the group. It had a simple chord progression, a catchy hook, and the kind of energy that could work on local radio if the performance was strong enough. Don set up the microphones carefully, positioning the Jackson brothers in a semicircle for the backup vocals, while Michael stood alone at the lead microphone, looking impossibly small in the professional recording booth. "Let's do a sound check first," Don said, trying to keep his voice encouraging. "Michael, just sing a few lines so I can set your levels properly." Michael sang softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to need to sing louder than that, son. Really project your voice like you're trying to reach the back of a theater." Michael tried again, louder this time, but Don could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Okay, that's better. When we record for real, I want you to sing at that volume consistently. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Michael replied, though he wasn't sure he could. "All right, let's do a full run-through. This won't be the real take. This is just to make sure everyone knows their parts and the timing is right." The backing track started. Simple drums, bass, a little guitar, creating the foundation that the vocals would build on. Michael's brothers came in with their harmonies, tight and professional. They'd rehearsed this song hundreds of times in their living room, and it showed. Then Michael's cue came. He opened his mouth to sing, and nothing came out. His throat had closed up completely. The anxiety had taken over, and 8-year-old Michael Jackson, standing in a professional recording studio with everything riding on his performance, couldn't make a sound. Don stopped the tape immediately. "It's okay, Michael. That happens to everyone. Let's just take a breath and try again." In the control room, Gordon and Joe exchanged worried looks. This was exactly what Gordon had been afraid of. The pressure was too much for a child this young. Katherine, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. "Can I talk to him for a minute?" Don nodded gratefully. "Sure, take all the time you need." Katherine walked into the recording booth and knelt down next to Michael. His eyes were wet with tears that he was trying desperately to hold back. "I can't do it, Mama," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm too scared." "What are you scared of, baby?" Katherine asked gently. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I mess up and we lose everything? Daddy will be so mad. Everyone will be disappointed in me. All the money we spent, all the time we practiced. What if I ruin it all?" Katherine took Michael's face in her hands and looked directly into his eyes. "Listen to me carefully. Do you know why your daddy brought you here? Why Gordon is giving us this chance?" Michael shook his head. "Because you're special, Michael. Not because you're perfect. Nobody expects you to be perfect. Because you have something that most people don't have. You have a gift. And when you sing, you make people feel things. You make them happy. You make them want to dance. You make them forget their troubles for a few minutes. But what if I mess up in the studio? What if it's different than singing at home?" Michael asked, his voice still shaky with fear. "Then you mess up and we try again," Katherine said simply. "Baby, do you think I'd let your daddy bring you here if I didn't believe with all my heart that you could do this?" "No, Mama, that's right. Now I want you to forget about the microphone. Forget about the engineer. Forget about your daddy watching. Forget about everything except the song. Close your eyes if you need to. Just sing it like you sing it for me at home. Like it's just you and me in the kitchen, and you're singing while I make dinner. Can you do that for me?" Michael nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Katherine kissed his forehead and walked back to the control room, giving Dawn a confident nod that she felt more than she actually felt. Dawn started the tape again, and the backing track rolled. The brothers' harmonies came in, tight and professional as before. Michael closed his eyes just like his mother had suggested, and he sang. But this time, the sound that came out was completely different from the tentative sound check. This was confident, powerful, emotional. Michael's voice filled the studio with a clarity and control that made Dawn sit up straighter at the mixing board. The first verse was perfect. Every note hit exactly where it needed to be. The timing was flawless, and the emotion was absolutely real. This wasn't a child trying to sing a song. This was a natural performer inhabiting the music completely. The chorus came, and Michael's voice soared. His brother's harmonies locked in behind him, creating a wall of sound that was both tight and professional. Michael's eyes were still closed, but his body was moving slightly to the rhythm. He wasn't just singing the words. He was living them, feeling them, making them real. The second verse showcased even more control. Michael was in the zone now, completely lost in the music. The bridge required Michael to hit a higher register, and Dawn had been particularly worried about this part. It was where most young singers struggled, where their voices would crack or lose power. Michael nailed it. The note was pure, sustained, and perfectly controlled. Dawn found himself leaning forward, unable to believe what he was hearing. The final chorus built energy perfectly, with Michael giving it everything he had, building and building to a powerful finish. And then it was over. The last note hung in the air for a moment before fading away. Dawn pressed stop on the tape machine, and the studio fell completely silent. "That's a good scratch vocal," Dawn said automatically, falling back on professional habit. "We'll use that to identify any problems, and then we'll do it again for real." But Gordon held up his hand. "Wait, play that back." "It's just the first take," Dawn protested. "We should just—" "Play it back, Dawn," Gordon said firmly. Dawn sighed and rewound the tape, pressing play and expecting to hear what he always heard on first takes. Good bones, but plenty of issues to fix in subsequent recordings. The playback started, and Don Davis's expression slowly changed, because what came through those studio monitors was impossible. The tone was perfect throughout. The pitch was dead on from start to finish. The emotional delivery was exactly right, building where it needed to build, pulling back where it needed to pull back. There were no mistakes, no flat notes, no timing issues, no moments where Michael's voice got tired or lost focus. It was, in every technical and artistic sense, a perfect vocal performance from an 8-year-old child on his first professional recording session on his very first take. Don had been recording artists for 15 years. He'd worked with seasoned professionals who needed 20 takes to get a vocal this clean, this emotionally connected, this technically perfect. And Michael Jackson had done it once, on his first try, while scared out of his mind. Don slowly removed his headphones and turned to look at Gordon, his face showing complete bewilderment. "That's impossible," Don said quietly. "But we just heard it," Gordon replied, equally stunned. "No, you don't understand," Don continued. "Adults can't do what he just did. Professional singers with years of experience can't walk into a studio cold and nail a lead vocal on the first take like that. The microphone picks up everything, every tiny mistake, every moment of uncertainty. And there are none. There are literally no mistakes on that recording." Don turned to look through the studio glass at Michael, who was standing at the microphone looking worried and uncertain. "Did I mess up?" Michael asked into the talkback microphone. Don pressed the button to respond, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Mess up? Son, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've recorded gospel legends, blues masters, seasoned professionals, and I have never heard anyone nail a lead vocal on the first take like that." Michael's eyes widened with surprise and relief. "So it was okay?" "Okay," Don laughed. "Michael, what you just did is what professional singers spend their entire careers trying to achieve. Most artists need 10 takes, 20 takes, sometimes more. You did it once." In the recording booth, Michael's brothers were staring at him with a mixture of pride and disbelief. They'd always known Michael was talented, but this was something else entirely. "Can I hear it?" Michael asked shyly. Don played it back through the studio monitors so everyone could hear it properly. As the recording played, Michael's expression changed from anxiety to wonder to pride. That was him. That was his voice. And it sounded good. Really, really good. When it finished, Gordon stood up and walked into the recording booth, looking at Michael with something approaching reverence. "Michael, how old are you?" Gordon asked. "8, sir," Michael replied. Gordon shook his head in amazement. 8 years old. "Joe, do you understand what you have here? This isn't just a talented kid. This is someone who records like he's been doing it for 20 years. This is someone with instincts that can't be taught." Joe's expression was complicated. Pride mixed with vindication, mixed with something like awe. He'd always believed in his sons, but this was beyond even his expectations. "So we're keeping that take?" Joe asked. "Keeping it?" Gordon laughed. "That's going to be the master recording. We're not touching it. You can't improve on perfect." They recorded the rest of the song, the brothers' additional harmonies, some background vocals, instrumental flourishes, but Michael's lead vocal stayed exactly as it was from that miraculous first take. When the session ended 3 hours later, Don pulled Gordon aside. "We just recorded something special," Don said seriously. "That kid is going to be famous. Not local famous, not regional famous, really famous." "You think so?" Gordon asked. "I know so," Don replied with absolute certainty, "because I've worked with hundreds of artists over the years, and I've never seen anyone with that level of natural ability. Most great singers have to learn how to record, how to work with microphones, how to sustain energy and emotion across multiple takes. Michael just walked in and knew how to do all of it instinctively." Gordon looked back at Michael, who was laughing and joking with his brothers, just a normal 8-year-old kid again. "Should we tell Motown about him?" Don asked. "Not yet," Gordon said thoughtfully. "Let's get this single out first, build some buzz locally, and then when Motown comes calling, and they will come calling, we'll have some leverage in the negotiations." Gordon was absolutely right. Big Boy was released in January 1969 and became a regional hit throughout the Midwest. By summer, Motown had heard about the Jackson 5, and Diana Ross was claiming she'd discovered them. The rest, as they say, is history, but it all started with that impossible first take on a cold Saturday morning in Gary, Indiana. Years later, in a 1995 interview, Michael was asked about his first professional recording session. "I was terrified," Michael admitted with a smile. "I thought I was going to mess up and ruin everything for my family. My brothers, my father, everyone had invested so much in us making it. But you nailed it on the first take," the interviewer pointed out. I didn't know that was unusual, Michael laughed. I thought everyone recorded that way. It wasn't until years later that engineers would tell me stories about other artists needing 20 or 30 takes for a single song. I never needed that many. Did that ever change as you got more famous and experienced? No, if anything, I got more particular about first takes because first takes have something that later takes don't have: spontaneity, raw emotion. You can hear someone thinking on the 20th take. On the first take, you hear someone feeling. That's what I tried to capture throughout my entire career. So all those hit songs, Billie Jean, Thriller, Man in the Mirror, those were first takes. Many of them, yeah, or second takes at most. Because for me, recording was like capturing lightning in a bottle. You couldn't manufacture it or force it. You had to let it happen naturally. Don Davis retired from engineering in 1992, but he kept one treasure from his decades-long career: a reel-to-reel tape containing the master of Big Boy, the first professional recording Michael Jackson ever made. People ask me about all the famous artists I've worked with, Don would say in later years, and I've worked with some genuine legends. But that tape is my most prized possession because it's proof that I was there the day an 8-year-old boy walked into a studio and did something that seasoned professionals couldn't do. Did you know he'd become the biggest star in the world? And people would ask. Don would always smile before answering. After hearing that first take, yeah, I knew. Anyone with ears knew. Michael Jackson didn't become great. He walked into that studio already great. The world just needed time to catch up. March 23, 1968, lasted only 3 hours for the Jackson family. But in those 3 hours, 8-year-old Michael Jackson proved something that would define his entire career. That true talent isn't just about practice and training and hard work, though all of those matter. It's about instinct, about knowing what's right before anyone tells you, about having a gift so natural that you can't separate it from breathing. Michael walked into that studio terrified that he would fail his family. He left having created something perfect on his first try, setting a standard that would follow him for the rest of his legendary career. Because once you've proven you can do the impossible, people expect you to keep doing it. And somehow, miraculously, Michael Jackson always did.